A very good day and welcome to this tutorial, which is all about this Jason Voorhees bust. I'm gonna show you how I made it. I had this styrofoam skull laying around for years and well, I had to choose between a big Jason ice hockey mask and a smaller one. Decided to go with the smaller one because it fitted the skull better. Taking off the price tag and this cataract eye rubber that I had already because I used it in a former Jason DIY. I took my Sharpie, drew out on the skull where it had to go and had to create a bigger hole with using my soldering pistol to fit the cataract eye, and there it is. Over here I'm using my Sharpie to look where the famous X hole should go in the mask, as well as the damaged part in the part 7 ice hockey mask. I fixed the cataract eye with hot glue, and over here I'm using the Dremel to cut out the X hole, the damage that was done by the X, which has been in the Jason mask ever since. Put the mask back on the skull and took my Sharpie, drew out where the X hole in the skull should be. I decided to create this cut in his skull with this soldering iron as well, making it clean. Here I'm mixing yellow and white paint, turpentine based paint, to create this ivory look, and when I had the right color I painted the teeth and a part of the skull which will be shown later on. I get the idea that this is a vampire skull head, so it has some bigger canine teeth, but I knew I was gonna cover them in the end, so it wasn't such a big deal for me. Over here I'm using my Dremel to create the damaged part on the side of the mask. First with this cutting tool, and later on I'm using the sanding tool, so I could bring out more detail, not just some rough edges. I did it in the garden outside, because whenever it's the good kind of weather I always prefer to do this kind of things outside. Over here I'm using the sanding head to create more holes and a wider edge. Then it was time to paint. At first I decided to paint the edges with some black acrylic paint. And I'm also using a lighter brown and a darker brown, as you will see in the next step. The lighter brown. And I'm also painting the cut in his head as well, where the X went in part 3. Using some paper towel to smear it out, to make it a dirty look. And adding some darker brown as well. Et voila. Some wood stain, oh yes, to create more like a dirty look on the part of the skull that had that ivory look on it. Just using a brush to paint it on and then wiping the excess away to bring out the detail. I also do the same thing with the teeth. Then it's time to create the torso. I'm using this mannequin torso. It's wrapped in cling foil. Yes, cling foil. Not aluminum foil, cling foil. And over here it is covered in duct tape. I'm using a Sharpie. I put it on this lantern for the right height and just took it along the Sharpie so I knew where to cut it. Cut it open at the back, take it off and cut it out where I just drew with the Sharpie. The back is closed with duct tape again, and then I'm having this carbon. I drew where I had to cut it out so I could make a bottom, and I'm using duct tape to put the carbon on the bottom of the torso. I'm using a lot of duct tape because over here I'm gonna use expanding foam to fill it, and I didn't want that the expanding foam would come out of the bottom, so I close it really well. Just putting in some expanding foam, let it do its thing, and just wait until that was hardened out, and then you have something like this. And I'm gonna cover this in masking tape like you see here, because masking tape is a lot better for paper mache. I covered it in paper mache using toilet paper and wallpaper glue, and over here I'm using hot glue to glue the skull on. Then it was time to create some face. Not that much. I'm using a simple cheap gray clay to create lips, some parts of his muscular surrounding his eyes, and just sculpting it right away. I'm using the cheapest clay ever because I will be covering it in toilet paper and rubber latex. Just sculpting it as I go along. I am basing my face sculpture on part 7. I think that is still the best Jason zombie look ever created. I'm a huge fan of part 7 and the 2009 remake. I guess I'm the only one, but hey, I like them. Creating some edges of where skin will stop and bone is shown. And of course the left side of the face, which is to the right if you're watching it, it has some openings in the cheek. Toilet paper, rubber latex and blue paint. I'm gonna mix the rubber latex and the blue paint. I'm using blue paint as a base color because in part 7, well, he seems to be bluish, grayish. And I wanted a very different approach to this than I used with my Freddy Krueger bust. Over here I'm just painting the rubber latex colored blue on toilet paper as well as on the skull itself, using large brushes and smaller brushes. And I'm placing the latex toilet paper which creates this zombie-like skin structure that I really like. I really like using toilet paper for this. It's very cheap and it creates that depth that you want in a sculpt like this. It takes a really long time to do such a thing, but it's a lot of fun. And it's also very amusing to see the result. But for a video like this, I put it on time lapse, so it won't be boring for you when you're watching this. The same thing on the other side, putting it on and painting it. I printed out 2 examples directly from the movie, but I also found a latex part 7 mask on Pinterest, which showed much more details that I could use as a reference. Over here I covered the cheek, but I wanted parts to be open, so I'm opening it up with some scissors again and just painting it. Using just a smaller brush, no toilet paper, for some detailed facial structures. Well, you get the idea. Over here I'm just using smaller straps of toilet paper to cover the muscular structures that I created with clay. This project didn't cost me any money. I was only using materials that I already had, like the cataract eye, the Jason ice hockey masks, and so on, toilet paper. Of course, I didn't create this for free, because at one time I had to pay for the mask, for this styrofoam skull and all sorts of things, but it was just laying around and decided that I could create this Jason Voorhees bust out of it. For the larger parts like the back, of course you can use paper towel as well, which is much bigger than toilet paper. Well, you get the idea. And then you have something like this. Over here I'm just covering it using a sponge and red acrylic paint and wiping it to create a more skin-like color, and Jason will become less like a Smurf. And there it is. Then it was time to start some airbrushing using brown to cover the parts that were still a little blue, but also bringing out the detail. I'm using a lot of brown over the complete torso, and later on in the facial structure right here I'm using black for the latest details to bring them out. I'm wrong, this is still brown. Now at this point I'm using black, yes, I'm sorry. creating shadows and depth, bringing out the details. Clear varnish, yes, I wanted him to shine. Also for protection of the paint, of course, and all my work. I'm just covering it in clear varnish. An old green, army green t-shirt, tucked in the sleeves and cut it off, creating holes using a knife over here with some hot glue, gluing it in place. This plastic chain I already had. I used it several times, including one time with a Jason puppet on Halloween before. Then you have something like this. It's done, but I just needed to put the famous ice hockey mask on. And that's it. This is how I created my Jason Voorhees bust. There are several ways of doing this. I created this one, costing me no money when I began. Thanks for watching.